Hello, everyone. Welcome to another EA Zoom meeting. My name is Tara All, and I am excited to be back. It's always an honor to be part of the EA Zoom group, and I'm very thankful to it. So I guess, first of all, I want to express my gratitude. And my topic tonight is spiritual Mars. And in looking at the list of what people would like to hear about, spiritual Mars keeps popping up. And Mars, for me right now, has been a big part of my personal journey. So before I launch into the individual slides, I want to share a little bit about what's really prompted me to kind of be in this Mars space. I work with a technique called planets on the first, which is choosing a planet in your birth chart and then moving it to the ascendant. And essentially you choose for a period of time to live through that function that planet represents in yourself, kind of as your filter or how you approach life. So if there's a particular planet that you maybe feel less competent with, less familiar with, then it's a great way, for example, to say, hey, my Venus doesn't feel very strong, so how can I pick Venus and choose Venus first? So I've been working with this technique for several years with myself and with some of my clients. But this year, my birthday is in July, so since last July, I've been living Mars first. And it's been giving me a really new experience of what that Mars represents in me. And I will preface this, first of all, by saying that I have been listening to a lot of Jason Hawley recently. I'm a huge Jason Hawley fan. And so the words and concepts, masculine and feminine, I am grappling with how I want to approach that for myself and in my practice. So I've been kind of leaving those words out and changing it around a bit to give more room. I love how Jason works with night and day and twilight. So that's just something I'm offering now because you'll see some slides change. And if you've listened to my meetings before, I've talked about Mars being the marvelous masculine, and certainly it is, but I want to have room for more. It's interesting, in my own chart I have Mars conjunct the moon, which is an interesting blend because it's so much, if we want to use the words feminine and masculine, those two together. And so for me, I'm looking more at the wholeness of the energy. So let's just go ahead and launch right in here. This summer, oops, 1 second here. I can move this. Okay, this summer, Mars is going to be brighter in the sky than it's been in years. So for those of us who are excited about Mars, this is a big deal. So the Sun-Mars opposition is going to happen when Mars is closest to the Sun. We call that perihelic opposition. And this happens when Mars is relatively close to Earth. So if you're excited about really, redefining, reigniting, getting excited about what that Mars function is in you, and to me, Mars represents our authentic desire in part. So much of this is about what we instinctually and naturally want. And so this summer, when Mars is so bright in the sky, in some ways it's like this big beacon that asks you, what do you want? So if this material and talking about Mars is exciting to you, feels interesting to you, tune in this summer into the sky. So I do believe that we need to reconnect with our whole energy, and the whole includes all of its parts. And therefore, instead of saying, for example, there's a big emphasis right now on reintegrating and getting back to the divine feminine. And that's a really important thing to welcome our mystery, our receptivity, our sensitivity, our ability to feel into things. And the softer, more flowing, curving aspects of us, sort of the strength that comes from yielding. All of these things are important, but I am coming to a place where I don't like exclusion. So I like to think about more, how can we have a better integration of sort of all the energy that's going on and an appreciation for all of the energy. And to me, because Mars represents the way we initiate, any action, regardless of the type of action, falls into the domain of Mars. And when you are personally passionate and excited about things, which is a big part of the Martian function, right? Like, I'm fired up. When we have that energy freely moving in us, and when we courageously act on behalf of our purpose, which is another Martian function, I do believe that there is so much hope in what we can do in the world. And so my question to all of us is, what are you going for? You know, and as we get further in this presentation, I'll talk about the relationship, the phasal relationship between Pluto and Mars being our deeper or higher soul's will or desire with our personal will, lowercase w, will, on a bigger level. But ultimately, Mars is the go out and do it, act it on the underlying deepest intention. So to me, to say, like, for example, this presentation is spiritual Mars, I would say, well, everything is spiritual if that's your perspective. And I don't think that because Mars traditionally is, you know, we look at it as the warrior, it's, you know, how we fight, it's how we get into action, right? It's our sexual energy. All these things are true, but that's not any less spiritual, for example, than Neptune, depending on how we're coming at it and how we're working with it. So we have a dual nature, at least the nature of humans as I believe it to be, that part of us always wants to return to the oneness. You know, this is the part that wants to go down and in, back into everything. And this part of us in some ways wants to go back to whatever we consider source to be, whether you call that God, spirit, energy, nature, but there is a desire to lose our form and to just be part of that never-changing consciousness. And in many ways, we liken this to a Neptune experience, right? It's where we lose ourselves, we lose our edges, and we become just part of the flow. But the other part of us, at the same time, the dueling desire, wants to separate, wants to experience ourselves as a distinct self. You know, wants to break out of that oneness and to have a strong sense of separateness. And this energy is very much about or represented by Mars. The Mars in us is the part that wants to break out. Think about it this way, the part that wants to return being into the circle, Mars wants to bust out of that circle. So just for a minute, and you may be tuning in just on an audio level, not be able to look at this, but most everyone knows what the Mars glyph looks like, the circle with the arrow coming out to the side. So just for a minute, I would invite you to just meditate on this symbol. What do you feel when you think about and feel into the symbol? I was listening to Cameron Allen had a fabulous Zoom meeting just last week on the symbols. I believe it was called The Symbols Speak, and which I enjoyed very much, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in getting back to the symbols, and actually he had a whole wealth of information in there. But he talks about how in order to experience the symbols, we have to reverse them. The way I've always looked at this is I've always thought about, for example, if I want to be in my birth chart, I imagine myself turning around and backing into my chart. So in this case, if we're looking at the Mars symbol, which we look at it, the arrow points out to the right. If we turned around and backed ourselves into the Mars symbol, that arrow would be shooting to the left. So just something to think about as you're sitting with the symbol, but truly, you know, what does it feel like to you? So ultimately, the Mars in us, and you know, one thing that I've done with symbols like that is I have spent time sitting with them, and then I might do a whole brainstorm with words or images and write whatever comes to me. So for me, with that Mars glyph, a big part of it is breaking free of the circle, you know, which is literally what the glyph looks like. But that's what the Mars energy feels like. It's moving up and out of the circle. So when you feel yourself in situations where you feel at risk of being consumed, you know, into the soup, for example, and you feel yourself trying to force up and out, you know, you can sort of start to feel how, wow, that's my Mars nature coming forward. And I think it's important to honor that part. It takes a lot of impetus to push up out of a circle. So the Mars in us, for me, truly is how I am becoming myself. And I liken this to, you know, Mars rules the sign Aries. And so Aries is streaming consciousness, meaning who I am is happening moment to moment. When we're working with Aries or with Mars, it's about real time. So the only way to discover who I am is to just be with myself moment to moment, because it's an ever evolving process. And it's the Mars part of us that is identifying through that experience of becoming, right? And we all do this differently. So Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about this awareness, becoming aware of the continuous state of becoming. So it's happening regardless of whether or not we're aware of it, right? I mean, we might be missing our own show, which most of us, including me, do most of the time. You know, we're not really present for the moment. The closer and more intimately we become connected with Mars and any Aries signatures in our chart, the more intimate we become with moment to moment. And in the moment to moment is unknown, because we don't know what's going to unfold in that place, right? It's spontaneity. Jeffrey Wolf Green also says that Mars is how we identify with and instinctively act upon our soul's desire. So you see, I think it's interesting that oftentimes people kind of relegate Mars to, oh, it's associated with the ego, you know, and it kind of gets shoved to the corner. And then we look to these places that we consider to be, you know, deeper, broader, or more spiritual, more in touch, and then we perhaps give them more weight. But ultimately, at least with this particular understanding, with this teaching, our deepest soul's desire, represented by Pluto, we act upon it through Mars. In other words, the human experience that we are having is not possible without the Mars in us. It's like Mars is the vehicle for the spiritual evolution. And so that gets me back to having a different relationship for me with the Mars in me, giving myself more freedom to really like experiment, acting upon what I want. So with Mars, when you choose yourself first, you can also serve the world. And I think, again, we kind of get stuck in this paradigm of saying, well, you know, I'm either selfless or I'm selfish. You know, it's so easy to polarize, so easy to send things to opposites, right? And not find the middle. But I think that when we healthily and happily embody our Mars and say, yeah, I'm choosing me first. I mean, it's my lifetime. I mean, I came to do this. When we do that in a healthy place, we are most available to serve and be of assistance to others. And what's interesting is I think that then they naturally align the evolutionary purpose of what we are growing through or experiencing, how we're transforming in our lives, naturally fits in ways that it supports others as well. So we don't have to work quite so hard. Like when our Mars is rocking and rolling, I fully believe we don't have to work so hard. So some other bits around Mars, the courage to do it for the first time. And the first time is an important piece with this because, you know, Saturn has a lot to do with just doing it too. But Saturn would be a lot more of, I plan it, I set a goal, I get it just right, I build the foundation, which is absolutely important. But with Mars, the real guts comes in, I'm going to try it for the first time, which means I have no idea how it's going to turn out, if I can do it, what will happen. So it is I have the instinct, I'm going to do it. And Mars is our drive to explore ourselves and the world. So this note at the bottom, this is not news to anyone, but this idea of doing what's best for you, it's like if we liken ourselves to a tree, you know, if I am meant to be, let's say, a maple tree, but I'm trying to grow into a flowering cherry tree because I think that's what I'm supposed to be, then I'm not going to be of service to myself or others in the capacity that I could, because my wiring isn't for that, you know? So there's something exciting about feeling into, and see, I think about, I attribute wiring to Mercury, but Mars is our energy, right? Our raw energy. So when I start to really work with the energy of who I authentically am, I become available to come online and do a lot of things that I'm not otherwise. If I try to adapt my energy too much or work within an energy field that doesn't naturally align with mine, then I'm going to have limitations around what I can do, more limitations. So this essence of Martian energy, and I have a lot of slides, and I don't want to spend all the time on them. So some of them you'll see me skip through and not read all of them. But I want to leave time for the end because I think looking at the charts is such an important way to learn. Sharing is one of my favorite things to do. But back to the essence of Martian energy. So it's the initial individuating impulse. And we can look at this as in Cameron's meeting on symbols, he spoke about how with Mars, we birth ourselves every moment. And to me, this aligns with the idea of it's how we are becoming. So if we think about it, what it is like to be born, I mean, there's a bit of a shock. You know, we come out of this place where things were taken care of, and now all of a sudden we're out in the world for this first second, and we don't know, you know, how things are going to go. And in essence, usually, you know, if things are going well, there's a scream, you know, whether that scream is of excitement or fear or what it may be. I mean, most of us can't tune in exactly to how we felt the moment we were born, but that's the idea of Mars every moment. It's like I'm being reborn all the time, which is exciting if you feel stuck. Because getting in the Mars groove is like, you just let it happen. You know, it's like the past matters less and the future matters less, because every moment is you're shooting out, you know, shooting out again. There is a big aversion towards being consumed and assimilated with Mars. You know, there's, if you think about it this way, the moon, for example, the moon energy wants to homogenize everything, wants to make it the same, find the sameness. Well, in Mars is the breaking away from that sameness or assimilation, breaking out and doing one's own thing. So with Mars, we find inconsistencies and we find chaos because we're breaking a pattern. You know, sometimes that can feel scary or unsettling to people, but we need to break patterns to find our groove. It's like we're not going to break a pattern forever, but we need to shatter it enough so we can figure out our own rhythm, right? So how our own energy flows. Mars also is direct and penetrating. So it wants to ever move into new territory, and it does it in a very direct, pointed way. One thing that the Mars in all of us, it really does need a purpose. Know that energy, it wants to work towards something. And so that's something that if you feel stuck as far as not knowing where you're going, if you have experiencing lethargy, if you just don't feel passionate about doing anything, chances are pretty good that there's something going on with that Mars part of your function. You know, we tend to feel good, full of energy. You know, we get excited, inspired about things in the moment when, like, that Mars is a healthy fire. In humanity, you know, there's this whole range, but when we're viewing just our society, for example, we can witness Mars coming across as competitive, dominating, individualistic, inconsistent. You know, we can see it as more of a fighting force, but we also can see Mars as being progressively idealistic and a champion of meaningful causes. You know, there's a visionary element to Mars that when Mars is serving something that we believe in and that we care about, then Mars is an amazing hero on that journey. You know, we talk about Mars sometimes being henchman to the sun, you know, so it's another way to look at it as well. But, you know, this is the idea of figuring out kind of what the deeper purpose is so we can give Mars important work to do. Because when that's connected, we can have such deep commitment to being in service of our path and purpose. Without that, Mars is looking for something to do, right? Mars doesn't want to sit around. So in the absence of something to be dedicated to, in the absence of something that serves that purpose, then that Mars energy can go awry, and that can go awry in the body, that can shoot outwards in different ways. There's a variety of ways it can happen. So Mars is intimately connected with our animalistic desires or our basic urges. And in the United States, we are not very comfortable with these. We are not very comfortable with our basic instincts. We're actually not comfortable with our basic bodily functions. So in some respects, we already come with a little bit of a handicap into our lifetime, at least here in this culture, because the very nature of who and how we want to be without thinking about it, it's like there's almost like a little lid put on that. So sometimes through periods of our lives, we have to go through periods where we blow the lid off, and that can present in all different kinds of ways. But the other thing is we can talk about Mars as being connected with our personal will or the ego's will. And it's interesting because I can't remember who it was, but at one point in time I was reading or hearing someone speak, and it might have been Mark Jones, that we experience the dark night of the ego, not a dark night of the soul. And it's interesting, we say dark night of the soul so often, but the soul doesn't experience a dark night. That's a personalized, ego human-based thing. So if anything, it's our Mars, and our moon, other places. But as far as the will, like those blows to the ego, that's a Martian thing. And this idea of fighting for what we are or who we are, it starts with birth, but it doesn't end with birth. So when we take a stand for what we want and what we are, we define ourselves as separate. So imagine, this is a good example. Think of teenagers or people leaving the home, right? This is what I want. This is who I am, and I'm going to do it my way. That's a very Martian thing. And when we make those statements, when we initiate those moments, we can't go back. And this will trigger a natural fear, right? Because remember, there's the dueling desire of, I want to belong. I want to be part of the circle. I don't necessarily want to be left alone. So it's always a risk. Mars always involves a risk, but it's a healthy risk because it takes us into a new territory where we can actually develop into more of who we are. So here's a few more just ideas on Mars. One thing I was thinking on is that the fight in us, that impulse to fight or to fight for something or with something, it facilitates mastering skills fully. In other words, Mars helps us reach our, take the potential in us and actually do something with it. It's the Mars, I'm gonna get up and move towards it. I'm gonna make it happen. I'm going to charge in and see what happens. It's that energy that allows us to then go further. Think about it this way. Mars is the igniter. Without the ignition, nothing's going to get going and nothing's going to continue going. We have to get started. So people with strong Mars, strong Aries in their chart, part of their gift to the world and to themselves is just to get things going. It's not necessarily to see them through or to handle all the details. It's to bring new information forward. Start new ways of thinking, start new ways of being, get it going, get it moving. And in nature, Mars is antisocial, meaning that it serves the self rather than the community. Now, that, like I said, that doesn't mean that through our Mars function we don't serve community, but in its nature, Mars is first about me. But again, I think it's very difficult to be fully who we are out there in the world in the most beautiful way if we've not first done the me stuff, which is also why in astrology, if we skip all the personal planets and put all of our focus on Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which is a fantastic way to bypass your daily life, You know, we can look at these big signatures and big transformative things, and we can really be connected with spirit in other realms, and we can understand the continuity of our lives and how, you know, how you know, we are going to continue on forever in these different ways. But when we do that, we literally bypass the human experience, which actually is the key to our evolution, at least in the way we're choosing here. Okay, so Mars is the pusher, which means generally Mars doesn't like to be pushed. So this is something to keep in mind when you're thinking about Mars. And when Mars is retrograde, that can feel like a pusher, which can be irritating to Mars. So if you're following or playing around with your own Mars, these are some things to look at. But the Mars function is meant to break things apart so we can come back together in a new way. And I look at this as the ultimate science and psychological experiment is happening in us. And in the tarot, the Mars card is associated, or Mars is associated with the Tower card. So the Tower, right, is where things have to blow up, where deconstruction has to happen for something to rebuild. In almost all Tower cards in the tarot, you see the lovers flying out of the Tower, you know, one to either side. It's like the union got broken apart and it has to fall apart and all the rubble comes to the ground, but then you build something new. So this idea of Mars being a pathfinder, a pioneer, breaking tradition, being a maverick in many ways, right? These are very Martian things. So some things to think about when if you're feeling into your own Mars. I want you to think for a second about getting what you want. And if you can, and for some of us, it's hard to tap into this because we're so linked with what the person next to us wants or what our family wants and our partner. I mean, it's hard sometimes to get clear on what you want. But to be in this Mars place, I want you to really feel into what do you want? And you can think about this as in what do you want right now? Like maybe you don't want to listen to this anymore. What I really want is to turn this off. Maybe you're sitting in traffic and what you really want is people to get out of your way. Maybe what you really want is not to have to cook dinner when you get home, but you've done it forever and everyone counts on you to do it. So you're probably going to do it anyway. So tune into what do you want? And then I want you to imagine if someone said to you, go get up and take what you want, like imagine a table full of all the things, I don't know, make up whatever you want on the table. And if someone said, go get up and take what you want, you know, how do you feel about that? Right? Like, would you get up and take it? You know, would you sit and wait around to see if someone else, you know, wanted the same thing? Would you, you know, what I'm getting at here is what's your relationship with going after what you want and knowing what you want? You know, another example is how do you take your turn? So let's pretend right now you are sitting in traffic. How do you take your turn? You know, do you sit and wait and wait and wait with your blinker on to get in forever? You know, letting everyone else go first? You know, are you super aggressive and do you just like, you know, force your way right in? You know, do you honk your horn and scream people to get out of the way? Do you avoid busy streets altogether because you, but this is but traffic, for example, is a good way to look at how do I take my turn and do I take my turn? And also to feel underneath when you're not taking your turn, how does that feel? Because usually, even if we keep it under wraps, we're angry about it, you know? For me, choosing Mars first this year has put me really face to face with the idea of it's my turn. And what does it mean for me to take my turn and have my turn? But that's the Mars function. It's my turn. And another way to think about this is with Mars, how do you really give it to someone? And you can use your imagination for which direction you want to take that. But Mars is how we give it to someone. Not how we take it, how we give it. You know, maybe you don't ever give it to anybody. Maybe you give it to people all day long. These are fun things to play around with. When your weapons come out, Mars is probably coming to your defense, meaning Mars is probably triggered. And it's really useful to acknowledge when this happens with yourself, right? My fight response is turned on. You know, and you can usually feel the adrenaline, even if it's a small situation, and maybe someone has criticized something you did in a very minor way, but you can feel it. You can feel like that the adrenals kick in, and you can, maybe you feel a little shaky, maybe you get a little frozen, maybe you get whatever it is, but in those moments, or maybe it's a big moment, right? Maybe something really terrifying is happening. Regardless of what it is, it's good to acknowledge my fight response has been kicked on, and I will not do my best thinking here. Now, in emergency situations, that's fine because we just need our basic faculties and we need to get out of danger. But in other situations, we recognize when that happens, we're operating with less mental capacity. So it's good to stop for a second and just give yourself space, feel what it is that's coming up, because Mars is very reactive, and what we want with our Mars is to learn techniques and ways to respond instead of react when it comes to Mars. That's a deeper, more connected way of recognizing, yes, I'm reacting, which is totally normal. My Mars is doing what it's supposed to do. And now I can slow down for a second and wait before I just react based on that happening. Again, Mars is doing, and I think this is so important, those reactions and things are totally normal. This isn't about shutting them down. It's about being conscious of them and giving ourselves more room, which for me is moving that Mars from more of just a basic energy to a more spiritualized Mars. It's a more, I'm thinking about that beyond just what my body's doing, beyond just how my mind's racing, beyond just how, my palms are now sweating. It's seeing it in the bigger picture. And this just briefly, as far as weapons of choice, because I find it interesting, Aries, when we get defensive, or when we get pushed into the offensive, which generally happens after we were defensive, Aries tends to use the body or physical force and aggression, but equally Aries will bluff. And if you watch Aries, you will see they put on a big show, but just as often Aries will run away as it will stay to fight. But still, it's a physical presence. Taurus, the weapon oftentimes will be money and resources. So if there's a confrontation with someone, for example, the tendency of Taurus might be to withdraw or to use money or resources. Like they might reject value or worth of something. Gemini tends to use words and wit and information. I know more than you. I'm smarter than you. I'll outthink you. And those of us who have experience with Gemini, we know how this feels. Like sometimes you can just sit there and look at someone who's Gemini and just be, okay, I can't keep up with you. But that's the win for the Mars and Gemini, right? Cancer, it's emotions and feelings. So this can be we usually see Cancer be either overly emotional or withholding emotion. So think about that, crab in its shell. It's either all the way tucked in, or it's coming out. And another thing that can happen with Cancer is there's such a family connection with Cancer is literally a good weapon is to simply disown someone. You're no longer my sister. Because that is when any of us are feeling defensive, again, this is just sort of how we go to trying to mitigate our own reactions and feelings. So it's natural that Mars would react these ways. With Leo, it's oftentimes love and attention. Imagine kids, you're not invited to my party. I'm not going to play with you anymore. Virgo, criticism and analysis. Libra, relationships and social connections. Sometimes with Libra, it can be very, Libra's a great chameleon, and so they will generally keep up appearances, but they may make you look bad without being obvious. And if you're a Libra, you probably are well aware of how you can do this yourself, because it's pretty easy. Sometimes superficiality as well, with Libra can just simply put on the mask, and then you don't get, the real love from the person. Scorpio, power, control, secrets, manipulation. Scorpio sometimes can be, it's funny, we talk about drama with Leo, but that Leo is just the actor on the stage. Scorpio is the real drama. So, that's when the real stuff can come out. Sagittarius will use truth, beliefs, and religion. Sagittarius sometimes will use their high, lofty beliefs or philosophical understandings, their ability to conceptualize things to then make others feel small. In other words, I see the big picture, you clearly don't get it. That almost can be just sort of a flippant sort of like, smile at you, but clearly you have the feeling that somehow, that you were made to be smaller. Capricorn, judgment and shame, and sometimes the rules. Capricorn can be very quick to just say, you're not allowed to do that. And even if Capricorn would have been willing to bend the rules otherwise, like when this defensiveness comes up, it's real easy to then to reinforce the rules like to the letter of the law. Aquarius can be detachment and alienation, and Aquarius also can be very sarcastic. Pisces. And here with Pisces, oftentimes the weapon is simply denial, to deny that the thing even exists or happened, which can be really frustrating if you're the other party who is trying to be fully in it. Escapism, victimization, these things are also Pisces. So Mars in these signs or in the houses as they also align with the signs just gives you a flavor of kind of the natural tendencies of some of Mars. And the whole reason really that I share that is because I want to think about the idea of turning swords into plowshares, meaning if those are the natural weapons that you go for, then if that's a natural weapon, that means it's also a natural resource. So how can you use that the other way? In other words, if we think about, you know, a Mars with the lowercase w will, you know, Scorpio probably would use power and control to, you know, take charge of situations, to get what they want, to accumulate more resources, to whatever it may be. But that same ability is a positive resource, meaning how would we use power and control in a way to truly transform, in a way to become more intimate, in a way to achieve greater things for society, in a way to build things that have more true power, how to empower people and empower each other. So that was my whole point there, is when you're working with Mars, it's really easy for the less mature pieces to come out. But once they've come out, you know what they are. So that's why I'm saying don't shut them down. But once they come out, now think about, here's my material. How am I going to work with it? And that's where it gets pretty exciting to me. If Mars energy is blocked, you know, there can be all kinds of things. You can have anger and violence. You can have, there's a lot of physical symptoms, say like anything that erupts into rashes, boils, acne, you know, colitis is like a rash inside the colon. So all these sorts of angry things. We talk about sometimes like boils or pimples being, oh, I have this angry, you know, thing on my face or on my neck, right? That's a Mars concept. So and sometimes, you know, these things, sometimes we overanalyze things, and sometimes it's just a zit, not a big deal. But if you're experiencing some of these things, you know, chronic depression, if you find yourself procrastinating or just, you know, forgetting things, and if you find that, you know, your skin and your body is reacting, and then there's something to pay attention to here. There's something about you being born in every moment, you becoming, you being you breaking out of the circle, like somehow it's stuck. So before I skip ahead a little bit, because I think I want to, entertaining again this blocked or disconnected Mars, here's the thing. We talk about Mars as being action, but I want you to look at the flip side of it. Inaction is equal Mars zone. So if you find yourself experiencing inertia and boredom, like life negation, like if you just passively refuse to choose life, that same fighting against the impulse to do something or anything is still in the Mars zone, and you are still putting out a huge amount of energy to maintain it. So I'll use myself for an example, as I've been working with Mars first, and this is actually a pattern way before, you know, I chose Mars first. Mars also rules my chart. I get angry about doing things all the time. I just feel angry that I have to do things. And I'm recognizing how much that's a part of me coming to terms and to really getting to a different place with that energy within me. Because I will then be bored, but then won't want to do anything, you know. And I'm saying these are equal. Other moments in my life, I'm very inspired and passionate and power through things, but I'm finding those are equal Mars experiences. So Mars by sign, without getting into too much detail, it's how we are continuously becoming. So this idea of birthing ourselves in every moment, the sign that your Mars is in is how you are doing that. You know? So if you become disconnected with it, a real simple way to re-engage, for example, is to say, oh, you know, if your Mars is in Libra, you're becoming, or you're being born in every moment has a lot to do with your relationships. And that might be a new way to look at your relationships. Like your relationships are actually serving your self-identification, your self-becoming process. You know, it's not just about the relationship, it's how the relationship is helping you become. So this idea of Mars by sign is the nature of your life force. It is also how and when you need to be brave, assertive, and to ask for what you want. If you are experiencing inertia, boredom, if you feel like you have suppressed anger, if you feel like, for example, when I talked about being in the car, that you're not, you know, that example that you realize that you're not taking your turn, you know, that you're not getting what you want, that you're not actually stepping up for what really matters to you, the sign that your Mars is in is a real healing place to get more active, to give yourself more room in that area. Remember, that sign is a big part of how you're being born in every moment. So if you're not allowing like time, for example, to experience that energy or be in that playing field, then it'd be no wonder that you're frustrated, because it's how you're progressing as a separate individual. And Mars by house is where the awareness of our state of becoming is happening. So by house, it is where you try to impress others with your power or your honor or your sexiness. You know, there's a whole element to, you know, Mars wants things to be a turn on, wants things to be sexy, wants things to be exciting. You know, the Mars in us wants to, you know, wants the moment to be filled with passion. There should be, you know, a win available in it. And the house that Mars is in also can show where you have an extra, I call it like power pack or a motor running. So it's important to be aware of that, because if you don't have a way to channel that, that energy can really, you know, take a toll on you. Okay. I'm going to skip this, but I want to talk about this, is important. So to briefly summarize what I'm going to skip. To bring harmony into your Martian nature, I think here are some keywords for me. Express it. Find ways to express it. Even if it seems weird or awkward or something that you didn't think you were supposed to do, express it. It's important, right? Mars is energy. It needs to get out. Otherwise, it can be very destructive inside you and in your interpersonal relationships. So express it. And connect with it. And what I mean by connect with it is connect with your desire to pursue objectives. And you can look to the house for the area of life where you might most likely want to be pursuing objectives. And then thirdly, experiment. Experiment with being more active, expressive, and assertive, because that will improve your vitality and your health. And again, you can look to the house, you know, for the area of life. Right? So if your Mars was in the 12th house, and if you're not doing some kind of spiritual nature, meditative, artistic, some sort of experience that lets you lose the moment and just like blend into the ethers, that lets you experience compassion and grace and the beauty of not having to have definition or categories, if you're not giving yourself space for that, you're not fully giving yourself space to be born every moment, because that house is part of it. And that will bring more vitality and health to you, which will then bring more gumption to everything that you're doing, truly. So challenge yourself and be assertive in the areas associated with Mars's house and the houses with Aries on the cusp. And this also, the rising sign naturally carries Aries energy. So any first house stuff, you know, reconnect with your rising sign, because it represents your coming out into the world. How are you becoming? How are you being reborn? So allowing yourself space for that is really important. So here's the part that I want to focus on the most when we look at the charts. So from an evolutionary astrology point of view, there are 8 primary phases, and those phases are based on the lunation phases, and they reflect the principle of evolution. Energy always overlaps and mixes. So we're always coming from something and moving towards something, meaning there really are no endings and beginnings. It's more like spirals, cycles that are spirals. And we can learn about things selectively and focus on, for example, the parts, like focus just on our Mars and our chart, but real life is the blending and contrasting of everything. So I want to emphasize here that even though we break things apart in learning and talking about astrology, that I don't want to ever lose sight, and I want to encourage you never to lose sight, that Mars doesn't operate by itself in you. Nothing operates by itself. There can be no amount of breaking things down into parts that will add back up to the whole. The whole is the one big functioning thing. And we only get to feel and have that by experiencing it. So when we determine the phase between two planets, we reveal where in the current evolutionary cycle the two are in relationship with each other. In other words, integration of their functions. And you can do this with any two planets in the chart. You can look at your sun and moon and look at the relationship between your solar consciousness, your external purpose, how you're meant to shine, versus your inner emotional development and how you are receptive, how those two are coming together. In this case, we're looking at Pluto and Mars, because together they represent the alignment and integration of the wills, the higher will, Pluto, and the lower will, which is Mars. So Jeffrey Wolf Green, he says that it takes about 8 lifetimes, which links up with the 8 phases in general, to complete an evolutionary cycle. I don't subscribe to hard, fast rules around much of anything, but I like this idea. So whether it really is 8 years or some other variation of time, it works for me. So I am playing with it, and I invite you to play with me. And he also says that we can look at the relationship between Mars and Pluto by phase as the growth of the relationship of our will. So how our will is actually becoming and evolving. And another way to look at this is how long, in other words, this Pluto-Mars phase represents, at least in this understanding, how long we've been working on the main karmic evolutionary axis. And in evolutionary astrology, that main karmic evolutionary axis is, we look at the Pluto placement and the south and the north nodes of the moon. So it's interesting, right, to think that the Pluto-Mars phase can give us an idea of where we are at in the whole process. And so this is what gets me excited, because Mars is the part of us that is actualizing the experience. It's the part that is actually reacting to, that is initiating, moving through, but there's a bigger thing going on. But in some ways, Mars with Pluto is our marker for that process. So when Mars aligns with and serves our deepest intention or soul's desire, we become aware that we are our soul's desire. So sometimes we talk about our chart and we say, oh, my soul's desire is this, or Pluto represents my soul's desire. And when we break into parts, it's really helpful. But what we lose is a sense of the whole self. The Pluto in your chart is not something separate happening. You are your soul's desire, and you're happening real time. And it's the Mars part of us in this lifetime, the human experience, that is the real time, moment to moment happening. So I look at it this way: transpersonal and personal power unite with Mars and Pluto, right? These are both power symbols. And there's transformative potential with this. You don't sacrifice your wants. That's the thing. Like, you don't give up Mars, for example, to achieve Pluto. You don't give up your what you truly want, but you finally discover the true nature of your desire. That's what happens in the integration between the two. And that comes through living life, and this is where, I say here that, and the two shall become one. So our current lifetime and experience it's just a facet of our existence. But I look at it this way: that facet was so important that we incarnated on this planet to discover that peace. So let's fully get the peace. And I think that Mars is a big key towards, clearly, if we look at this relationship, it's a key part to actualizing all of it. In all of this, we become this facet of ourselves. We don't lose the wholeness, our eternal sense of ourselves, or our non-linear, non-form sense of ourselves, but in this incarnation, we become this facet. And we had to actually do it. And for me, that's a Mars piece. So right before we jump into the charts, I'm going to give a brief little rundown on the phases. To determine your Pluto-Mars phase, you can look at your natal chart and you pick the slower planet, in this case, which is Pluto, as a starting point, and you move counterclockwise motion until you hit Mars. And you count the degrees of separation until you reach Mars. And each sign is 30 degrees. And the total degrees of separation determines the phase. And when we talk about some chart examples, I'll show you. But truly, it's a simple math exercise. And the phases are new crescent, first quarter gibbous, full disseminating last quarter in balsamic. In new phase, it's the brand new start of the cycle. It's the emergence. So if we think about this how long we've been working the karmic axis, or our alignment of the wills, or actualizing our becoming, a new phase would be, it's brand new to us. And then in crescent phase, and by the way, new phase has an Aries energy to it. So if you don't know a lot about phases, but you know about Aries, you can apply most of what you know about Aries to new phase, because it is that brand new instinctual energy. You just don't know where you're going. So if you have Pluto-Mars phase in the new phase, like, you're not really supposed to figure it out. You're supposed to experience yourself. That first phase is trying it out. Crescent phase has a Taurus feel to it, because it's the very first time in the cycle that we really tried to give some value, meaning, and purpose to what it is that we're doing. So there can be some challenging of the old that keeps coming up. In other words, the old cycle, in other words, the one that happened before new, it's still there. The stuff is still new. So there's still a challenging and like a struggle to get over that, to keep the cycle moving. Crescent phase in Taurus is a lot about building a foundation. It's rooting ourselves in. First quarter has a very Leo feel to it, and it's a crisis in action. In other words, it is, okay, now I kind of know what I'm doing and I have a foundation. I just got to go for it. This is where you take the show on the road. But again, you're jumping on the stage and trying it. So the results are not necessarily what you want, because you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it yet. It's sort of like trial and error. And then the gibbous phase is very much Virgo. And this is where you stop and analyze where you've come so far. So in this case would be, where am I at in becoming who I am? Where am I at as far as my overall evolutionary development in this particular axis of evolution that I'm in right now? So, and this is trying to understand, trying to adjust and fine tune all the things that we know Virgo to do. The full phase opposition always is about a fulfillment on some level. So it's awareness, right? At the full phase, it's where we become aware of, here's what I've been doing. Here is what I'm doing. And now we can see it. And it's the very start of the first inklings of, now what am I going to do with myself, right? Now what am I going to do with it now that I have built it, now that I have a result, now that I can see it. And then the disseminating phase is where you demonstrate what you've learned. And by the way, full phase, I don't know if I said it, it's a Libra. Of course, it's the Libra archetype. Disseminating is interesting because we tend to give it a Capricorn, at least the way that I've learned it. And it's very much about, now we have to figure out how we're going to make it useful. Now think about all the Capricorn pieces, right? What am I going to build with it? What am I going to do with it? How am I going to share wisdom with it? How am I going to contribute towards the collective with my own evolution in this case? And the last two, we have last quarter, which is Aquarius. And this is basically a crisis in consciousness. It's where we have the last push to sort of reorient ourselves. It's the pinnacle of self-identity. So we reach this point where because what's coming next is balsamic, which is the ending. So at this point, last quarter, we may all of a sudden realize that we have new awareness, and now we can finally break free and liberate before the end. And also, the last quarter is very much looking at the self in the context of the greater good. So people with a Pluto Mars last quarter, in general, especially when we speak with people, at least everyone listening to this has awareness. So we would be wanting in some way to share our becoming and who we are, our identity, our own soul and overall evolution to somehow help the greater good. There's an idea of wanting to then make things better for everyone based on my own personal experience. Then we hit balsamic, and balsamic is Pisces, and this is the letting go. It is the culmination. It's reaching the very end. And so there's a sense of social destiny, meaning withdrawing, listening to the internal voice, slowing down, going into the blur, but then offering the last bits that we can, which will be the seed for the new cycle. So there can be a lot of surrender here, a lot of surrender, and this urge to sacrifice, to give of myself to society, because even though, at least in my belief, we're going to continue going on, this whole cycle, if we look at Jeffrey Wolf Screen's idea of this being about 8 years to get around the cycle, I'm wrapping this thing up, and even though I'm moving into something new, this will be, at this time, my last chance to give of myself what is goodness and helpful and wisdom and kindness and compassion and all the things that will help. But I look at this phase as a compost pile, like what will feed the compost pile. So Linda, let's go to Patricia. Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Well, it took up a lot of time, but we still have some. So I guess, first I want to tell you, you may not know, I looked at your chart. An example of this is Patricia has a Pluto 17 degrees Libra, and she has Mars 21 degrees Scorpio. So that is less than 45 degrees of Mars in front of Pluto. So she is a new phase. So she very much is that this is a start. This whole karmic axis that she's working with, it's new. It's literally moment by moment discovery. So Patricia, is there anything that you would like to share at this point about that? I think you're relatively new, right, to evolutionary astrology?
Yes, this is what I am. Yeah. But I would like to say that, yeah, I truly feel with the slides that you put in there, which was wonderfully presented, by the way, that I do feel like everything is all new and new experiences. Yeah. I have to live through things in as they come, Yeah.
And there's such a freedom. I like new phase between any planets. There's an excitement about new phase, because if you're willing to have the guts and to show up, and to show up, and that's not always easy. So, but if you are willing to do that, life happens for you. Like that, the whole idea of new phase, it's not, the hard work of, making it, build into something or figuring out what it means or sharing it with everyone. It really is like your job is to show up, to show up, to show up, to show up, to show up. And that showing up, is what will give you more of that feel of yourself. Your Mars is in Scorpio, so that's, and in the 12th house. So this is a lot of, energy that needs, at least to me, that needs time to itself. That's deep emotional energy. And especially in starting a whole new cycle, there will probably be times where you need to step away. That 12th house rejuvenates by finding some solace, finding some respite, finding a place to find the quietness on the inside. But I gotta tell you, you have a lot of stuff with that Mars. You know, you have Venus on it, you have Uranus on that Mars. So Mars just itself as an archetype, I would say, is important for you. You know, I mean, like it has a lot of significance in, well, from the Uranus perspective, in how you're breaking free from the past, and with Venus, you know, how you do your relationships, how your, you know, your self-worth and your self-love and your values. Like Mars is tied into all of that. How do you feel in general, Patricia? Do you mind me asking, like, how is your energy? Like, how would you, if you could describe the quality of your energy, what is it like?
I would say like 50% would be stuck, you know, and the other percent would be very Scorpio-like. And also, like you say, very much like I always have the persistency to go out and do things that I have to do. Even though I do suffer from depression and anxiety and phobias. It was funny that you talked about driving and all that.
Oh.
I do have amaxophobia, that's a phobia of driving, which I don't know where it came from. Because when I didn't have any accidents or anything, and to have a trauma or anything about that. But anyways, it's been some years now that I've been working very deeply in that, and it's been like maybe a year from now that I'm trying to use my Mars to get over it and try to use the car and drive on the highways especially. But yeah, I do need solitude to recover from a lot of energy, because I do feel like I absorb a lot of energy from other people and myself. I exhaust myself.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I don't know how, by the way, evolutionary astrology is a great way to work with all that Scorpio energy. You know, it's a natural way to go deeper and to understand and not just to get over things, but like to move through them. Like that's one of the, I think the biggest gifts to me with evolutionary astrology is that it kind of gives me understanding, and then I can be with myself there. Because that Scorpio, like that, like as far as the energy piece, you know, and the courage or the you know, the will to initiate and go for things, like with Scorpio, you know, doesn't like to not be in control. So even driving, for example, you know, there's a lot of things about driving we're not in control of. You know, we're not in control of people around us. We're not in control of the road. I mean, sometimes even the car does stuff that we're not in control of. So I mean, to me, that's understandable. But one thing I'm looking at just in general, you have South Node in Pisces and the North Node in Virgo. So if we think about this Pluto-Mars phase being new, meaning that this whole evolutionary intention or axis is new for you, then that means all those things are new. You know what I'm saying? Like, so this moving towards or integrating more Virgo, you know, will be new. And Virgo is figuring out what to weed out, you know, what to keep. So there's an element with, I always feel with the North Node in Virgo of, especially in combination with the Scorpio, sometimes there's a lot of heavy energy. So eventually Virgo needs to figure out how to filter out and send things out so that it can not be so bogged down with things. You know, a South Node in Pisces is just, you know, it can be full of everything, everybody's energy, all of this, all of this. There's no, like, it loses definition, right? And so Virgo is to have an accurate sense of yourself, to feel more you, individual you. And by Pluto in the 11th house, polarity being the 5th house, again, that's also more you. So I think this going deeper, whether it's evolutionary astrology or other tools, going deeper with yourself, it's helping you get a feel for what's really underneath everything else and more purely you. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah, it does. Like, what would you say that would be a good way for me to bring out my Mars energy in the 12th.
Yeah, do you do any, so some of that natural energy could be some people like shamanic journey, some people do deep psychological work, some people like the 12th house and the 8th house is very if you're a spiritual person, exploring those realms can be a big part of that, because to me this is about being willing to be vulnerable in the guts of yourself, right? So but in the 12th house, meaning 12th house also could add, we talked earlier about you do painting, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So the 12th house is 12th house is amazing for doing artistic things where you become the art. So, I don't know if, you and I talked about, we both do painting, but sometimes when I'm painting, I do kind of get lost in the process. Like,
me too.
I become the art, and to me that's a 12th house experience. Same as when we listen or make music and we just become the music, or when you're in nature, right? And for a brief period of time you just you feel yourself breathing with nature and being part of nature. So finding ways to kind of go deeper and then to find the parts of find parts of yourself there, I guess we one thing that I would suggest.
Yeah, totally agree. So I guess I would have to manifest it in that kind of way. But in day to day, how would I make the Mars react in a productive way? You know what I mean? Because I do have that half percent that I told you, it's stuck, like you present.
Yeah. Do you feel
mostly I have all my energy, it goes inside instead of outside. You know what I mean? Like my anger, most of the time I eat it up most of the time. I don't express myself, and that gives me anxiety.
So do you, I mean, astrology is great, but sometimes we need to actually talk with someone that we can actually, like studying astrology on my own, for example, has not replaced my experiences with like therapists or, different people in my life. Sometimes it's just people in my life who are willing to listen, because I think part of this is having a safe place to express those things.
So I guess that would be with my mom, because of the moon in the 7th, because I feel like I could tell her anything.
Yeah, I mean, with that question, I wouldn't look to your chart. I mean, I would look more to you. Like, how do what is your relationship with your mom? How do you feel with your mom? Does that feel like a safe place, with your mom? I mean, these are all.
Yeah.
But what I would say with that Scorpio is, Scorpio has these deep feelings, but it has a tendency to put, so let's think about Scorpio. It's fixed water, right? So what is fixed water? Frozen water. It can be frozen water. So we need, I would say, like, if I was, working with you more, I said we need ways to melt that. We need ways to warm it up and melt it, so we can get it flowing. So I would say, the artistic thing's good, but I don't know if that's enough, because Scorpio ultimately wants intimacy and wants intimacy with another person. There's this being able to trust someone enough to bare your soul with them, whether that's pretty or not is important. Scorpio in its nature is suspicious and oftentimes not so trusting, so it fears being betrayed, so it's not always easy to find someone. I know, like, parents can be great, but sometimes there's too much history with a parent for us to be completely, I guess, vulnerable in who we are. So only you can answer that question, but I would encourage you in some way to find someone or some way, some group even, some type of thing where, where it's okay to express those things. Like, some people, I'm not suggesting this for you, but some people would join like an acting club, for example, and they would find ways that they can just express different characters because it lets things out of them. There's different ways to get creative around how you might do it.
That's incredible, because I've been looking on that on Facebook today, an emotional theater. Oh my God, it's crazy. You just said what?
Yeah. Well, maybe. Oh, I mean, so maybe part of me feels that from you. And then if that's the case, then that would be fantastic, because to me, there's always truth in acting. You know, what makes an actor a good actor? You know as well as I do, when we watch someone play a crazy role, there's no way they could do that so well if they didn't have that in them, you know? But it can be a safe way to do it, in the sense that, you know, you're not, you know, walking over to your best friend and trying to unload everything in your closet. And I think it's healthy expression. And because you have Pluto in the 11th and the polarity is the 5th, acting would be a very healthy bridge, you know. It also lets you get up on the stage a little bit. So
no, I don't like to be on the stage, because my son in the 12th doesn't like to be. That's true. I get very embarrassed and nervous to act in public. But this is more like of a course to like take out your emotions. It's more like private. It's not that you're going to be in a you know, starring in the stage and all that.
Yeah, but to some extent, I guess so. Like for me, like when I say stage, the stage does not have to be a big stage. The stage sometimes, like I'm on a stage right now. Like I'm actually on a stage when I'm sharing with someone. You know, like so don't think of a stage in such a grandiose way. I mean, there's something to be said for having some platform, and maybe this program is the platform. You know, the platform for that to flow. But yes, for sure, all that Scorpio. You probably have a lot of drama in there that you've like kept the clamp on forever, and you know, like you will experience so much free-flowing power when that's not repressed.
Thank you, Tara.
It was my pleasure. Do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up or ask or talk about before we look at Cameron?
It's perfect. You answered all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, Cameron.
Hey, what's up?
Hey. So, you are
great
crescent.
Presentation.
Thank you. You're crescent phase.
Yep.
So how does that feel? Because compared to the new, crescent phase usually has a bit of the crush. You know, it feels like, I gotta do something with it.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It's like I gotta do something with it. Then I have all the Capricorn, which gives me the responsibility to do something with that. So it's like double time. But now, I guess it being so new, and then me having it all this stuff in the first house, it kind of lets me let go of all of it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that for you. I mean, knowing you've been such a gracious volunteer numerous times for me, I really want to thank you, because it's just been perfect for me, with at least for my presentations. But I was thinking about that. Like, we've talked about your things a lot, and being crescent phase, like, you know, you're only the second phase in it, you know, and you're not that far into the second phase. So in some respects, yeah, you know, it is nice. One thing, looking at these phases, it does allow us in some ways to maybe validate where we feel, right? Like if I'm new phase, I don't need to be acting like I'm all the way around the wheel, you know, ready to do it all. Like it doesn't have to come all together yet.
Right. A lot of times, yeah. So in the beginning, it was heady for me, and then I was like, well, what is that? Like when I was talking about in my talk the other day about embodying the energy. It's like, well, what does that feel like? And then like maybe write out what that feels like. And then every day do it once, every day do it twice, every day do it 3 times, then do it 3 times. So it's like, for me, it's like the willpower of Aries. I take a step back and I go back to Pisces and I give myself compassion, and that pushes me forward to have the willpower.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, mine is, go ahead.
Yeah, I did a workshop over like Aries was a lesson in willpower, and that was the main thing. This lady who did a study in Stanford, she was like sleep was number 1. So I was like, oh, that's like Pisces right there, and she's talking about willpower. That's like Aries. I'm like, yeah, there it is.
Yeah. So what would we say? So if we say Aries is willpower, which absolutely I agree with what we're talking about here. So what would you say crescent phase? If you're in the crescent phase of that, and it's Taurus phase, like, because I'm so with you into feeling into it and embodying it, because I just like to think, like, what does it feel like if you're if the evolution of your will, higher and lower will, if the evolution of your whole karmic axis right now is at crescent phase, it literally, like, I can hear my teacher Laura saying value, meaning, and purpose, value, meaning, and purpose, value, meaning, and purpose. Like, I could just hear her saying that over and over again, and that struggle to go back, right? Because when we're still kind of new into something, like, whether you consciously do or not, the whole last big cycle you were in is probably still really prominent in there somewhere.
Definitely. I feel that. And even in Placidus, my Pluto scoots back to the 10th house, so that even speaks on it more. And then also my sun, where my sun is, that's like right there with the that phase is the same with the ascendant.
Interesting.
So I double feel it. So it's like I seek the fractal pattern, and then I like and then I like embody it. So it's like I go forward, but I notice things that are like back there, and I'm just like, well, what is back there? And then I go forward. So it's like I do know that that's backwards. I just live it. I like live that.
Yeah,
I go backwards and retrieve and move forward, but I don't know exactly what it is that I want from it all yet.
Yeah, I don't know if I do either, but I get what you're saying, because this whole, so the whole Aries Mars concept, right? It's not the past or the future. It is the present, but the present actually can, like, the past and the future converge in the present. Like I think what I hear you saying is, like, you're literally, like, in the present moment, like, we're taking from, if you will, both sides, but those sides don't even exist. All that exists is the moment. So, like, that is Mars consciousness.
Yes.
Mars, and that is the trippiest thing for us, because we that is not the world we live in, right? We do not live in Mars consciousness.
Yeah. And I've begun to live in it even more every day. So it's interesting for sure.
Yeah. Hey, how do you feel about, so for you, and so you have Mars in the first house. So in some respects, you have a lot of Aries energy in your chart. We don't see Aries, but you have all that stuff in the first house, which all of it is streaming consciousness. So it's interesting that we have Capricorn, which we think of as being like time and space, right? Time, space bound Capricorn, but that's in the house of streaming consciousness. So I mean, I love to geek out on this stuff, but to me, it's almost like there is an element for you. And if we follow Jeffrey Wolf Green's theory that you still have a bunch of, years to go with this, I think you're just starting to break the barrier between time and space and streaming consciousness. Like, that's how I see it. Makes me excited to follow you.
Yeah, I can feel that, because one day I was meditating by like a little pond, and I'm actually sitting at it right now. That's why I'm like kind of like dark right there, whatever. But yeah, it was just like learn the structure of reality, and it said it clear as day.
Yeah, I fully believe it for you. And actually, hearing you speak last week, I was like, I totally get it. And think about so imagine what that will look like when you're in balsamic phase. I mean, let's think about this. You're only in crescent phase. Think about when you're at that balsamic phase, like what you may have to contribute to the compost pile, I call it. I mean, could be literally, I don't know, like I don't know if we would have a way to explain it, but I just feel like
I have a way to explain it, actually.
Do it.
Okay, so in the spagyric preparation with like plant medicine, at the end, the compost, what people throw away, you take that and you burn it and you crush it and you burn it and you crush it and you burn it and you crush it, and it turns into a mineral salt, and then you put it back into the medicine to make a holistic medicine.
I love that. Do you know my Pluto Mars is balsamic phase, so we'll have to have a chat later, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's great.
Yeah. So there it is.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we're at 7:20, but Cameron, do you have anything else to add about that you think would be useful about your chart or about Mars in general? This whole idea, I loved it, because I was preparing for this when I listened to yours, and you said, oh, we birth ourselves in every moment, as I was writing, as we're becoming every moment, so I was like, oh, we're like on the same page with it. It's easy to talk about it. It's not really easy to live it, you know? I mean, like, it's one thing to say, hey, you know, just being born every moment, but I don't know. It's,
Right.
it's a part to
So I guess
me.
talking to people about it is what makes it better for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I talk to people about it, it's like I say that, but then, or I like say something first. It's like it's simple, but it's very difficult. So we just, if we honor that before we even go into the process, then it eases the tension of the whole thing, the whole experience.
Yeah. And the best gift I think that Mars and Aries has to give is that just being in the moment, right? It is, you know, and there is no, so when someone comes and asks a question like, who am I supposed to be, or who am I, or whatnot, like and a lot of people feel frustrated because they think they're supposed to know the answer. And then we look at our karmic axis and say, well, because my Pluto is here, my South Node is here, my Moon is here. That's not it. Like, the only way to know who we are is to be with ourselves moment to moment. Like, it's dynamic. And yes. I think and so it's exciting to think that for me with Mars, as I'm kind of like, I don't know, like having a new relationship with Mars, I think it's the Mars that allows me to do that. You know, and we just use the word Mars, but I mean, it's that part of my being. It's that raw energy that allows me to actually do that.
Yeah, that's on point.
And I don't know, Cameron, what you think about this, but I was thinking about this too. Like, oftentimes we think about consciousness, but all these other things, but I mean, energy has consciousness. Like, why do we think about other things as, I mean, I was thinking, I think we underestimate the consciousness of our life force. Like, it has an intelligence, and Mars and Aries as archetypes, if we get out of our own way, that intelligence rises in the moment, but that intelligence can't rise when we're stuck in the past or the future, or when we're too constricted. Like, it needs the freedom. So I have decided, I mean, maybe in my Aries rising, you know, makes me extra crazy this way, but I feel like if we could encourage each other to do that, like to clear that, then there's really a lot of hope in so many areas. And you know, in that way, yeah, it's simple but not simple, but that to me is approachable.
Yes, I 1,000% agree. And I'm starting to try to work towards like learning myofascial release, and then like learning how the nervous system and plant medicine, the endocrine system, to give somebody a full embodied experience of that.
Yeah.
In the moment, so they can feel what it feels like they're released, or how it feels to resist it, while I speak about it, you know, astrologically as well.
Yeah. Yeah, like, well, yeah, so like you're saying that, but I would say, what does it feel like to have an Aries moment? You know, what does it feel like to have a real Mars moment? You know, I think in that moment you actually come online. Like, you feel your it's funny, it's almost like your energy comes online, and you're nothing but being.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that a lot.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, some days I just breathe, and it's like, it's so productive.
Yeah. So I know that for me, being a South Node Gemini, like, I'm slowly, like, I mean, it's taken me a long time, I'm slowly working towards letting that happen for me more. You know, like, actually, like, letting my own energy, my own life force actually show me what and how it is.
Yeah.
It's easy to use other parts of ourselves, and then we get in the way of our own flow. You know, I think about that way too, like in our own flow. Just like with Patricia saying all the energy felt stuck before, you know, like that's the thing, right? So Mars can help us get back into the free flow.
Yeah. I can feel that every time whenever I get into my ego, like, that's when the free flow stops for me. Because there's even been times where I spontaneously like could like spin a staff, and as soon as I was like identifying with that concept of spinning the staff, and it was me doing it, then it just disintegrated.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I have that too, where I start it's for me, it's usually thinking, you know, I'm overthinking and I'm trying to figure out, and it's, yeah, I've lost my ability to be kind of happening. It's like I'm not with me. The best way I can say, I'm not with me. I'm off somewhere else.
Yes, I feel that.
So Mars, right? If we look at our Mars, work with the Mars, Mars teaches us, I think, in a lot of ways, how to be with ourselves actively, right? If Mars has a lot to do with choosing things. So if I don't choose to be in my energy, in my own space, in my own experience,
I guess I experienced Mars from a space of being very angry when I was younger as well. So now, like, whereas you were saying a lot of things, it's like I'm feeling something different within myself because of the anger that I used to have. It's like, I can't even really explain it right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, but even like whatever you said about being present, it's like I just became hyper present again, and I felt something new, and I just don't even know. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing about Mars, right? We don't have. That's the thing. We don't have to analyze it. Like, and that's the thing. Maybe it's not like great to give someone a reading and say, well, we're not going to analyze it and figure it out, because most people like come for a reading like they want to pay for an answer. But sometimes the happiest answer is you don't have to have one. You know, like you really don't have to have one. Let yourself and let life show you. And that's to me, that's the spontaneous, instinctual part of Mars, and it will show us what we really desire. And I think any part of the desire we tap into reflects our deeper desire. So even if it's something that seems simple and ego-driven, there's some piece of that, you know, that's connected to a deeper desire if we pay attention. So.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, I appreciate you so much. This is awesome.
Well, I appreciate you too. So now that we've geeked out on Mars. But it makes me happy that we're not like really getting Mars to like, it's the masculine, you know, it's the like.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels good to give it some breathing room. And like, if we're talking about Mars being energy and room to flow, then I think the more that we take the archetype and give it some space, you know, we do the same thing for ourselves. So.
Yes, definitely. And that's exactly what's happening. So I can feel it. It's beautiful collectively. Even with the Mars going over the south node recently, I can like feel it of the south node of Pluto. Yeah, I can feel it. And that's when I was telling you about the structure of reality too. I don't mean to go on a rant, but I'm gonna go on like a small one. Just like understand the structure of reality. Now that I can see the nodes behind them, it's like more is coming through. And so when Mars went past that, it's like a different consciousness just came through me, and I didn't know how to express it fully yet. But even when I had my EA meeting, the moon was going over my ascendant, so it did it again. The same energy came through, and it's like how to be present is like first you like go root into the body fully. It's like you breathe into every space. Just breathing into every space. Like you just lay down for 10 minutes and just breathe into every space of your body. It just relaxes you so much. Like it's the simplest thing. It's like that's the being that you just breathe.
And
when
then
you just breathe, and the fear dissipates.
Yeah, and then the energy, your energy, the quality of your energy, how it wants to move, whatever intelligence it has, then it can show you, you know?
Yeah. Symbols.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, I know everybody's different time zones and tired, and Linda, I think maybe we don't have anyone.
No, I'm here, just eating my lunch.
I'm like, maybe we're out in Pisces land.
Yeah, that's beautiful though.
I
just wanted to say thank you for liberating the Mars, the Mars energy, because Uranus is sitting on the south node of Chiron right now. So, the Mars energy is always malaligned, and you brought out, what it really is. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, all of you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the volunteers, Patry and Cameron, and please thank Tara all, everybody. Catch you next time, everyone.
Thank you,
Gratitude.
Sarah.
Bye, you guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Brilliant.